This was a challenging week, filled with remembrances and the heaviness of loss. We began our week by commemorating the anniversary of Kristallnacht and carried on the somber sentiments with Remembrance Day this Wednesday. We watched with growing anxiety as COVID-19 numbers continued to rise across the world, and we mourned the death of a true rabbinic giant, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. This week also brings with it the passing of our past president, Barry Silver, and our member, Max Zeller. Our community and the Jewish community worldwide is in mourning. In the Shabbat, we read from Parshat Chayei Sarah and experience even more bereavement as we learn of the deaths of our ancestors, Sarah and Abraham. There is a heaviness to this week, and so we turn to Torah to offer us comfort and solace. As a modern Orthodox rabbi and the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, Rabbi Sacks was tasked with representing the diversity of the Jewish people on an international stage. And to continue the good teachings of Rabbi Spolansky from last night and this morning, in honor of his memory, this Shabbat, we learn from the Torah of Rabbi Sacks. Parshat Chayei Sarah begins with the words, the life of Sarah was 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. Rashi makes a strange comment on the seemingly unnecessary repeated phrase, these were the years of the life of Sarah. He says that the word years is repeated and without number to indicate that all her years were equally good. And Rabbi Sacks asks, and we ask, how could anyone say that the years of Sarah's life were equally good? She had so many challenging episodes in her life. Rashi puts forward a beautiful sentiment, but is it really possible? In just 12 chapters, Sarah was asked by Abraham to say that she was his sister rather than his wife. In fact, this happens twice, first in Egypt and then in Gerar, and she was taken into a royal harem. It's a very difficult and dangerous situation. There were many years of her life when, despite God's repeated promise and her desire to have many children, Sarah was infertile. There were times when she persuaded Abraham to take her handmaid Hagar and have a child by her, so that Abraham could be a father. And this caused great emotional pain. And then, of course, she found out that her husband was but a moment away from sacrificing their child. Her life was one of uncertainty and one of unfulfilled hopes. So how then can Rashi say that all of Sarah's years were equally good? How could she really be happy in each of her 127 years? And how could she endure all of this? The mystical texts of the Zohar discuss happiness using three biblical references. The Zohar states that Eve came into the world. She became wrapped up with a snake. Noah came to the world. What happened to him? He drank from the wine and he was drunk. Sarah came to the world. She descended and she came back up. As it is said, and Avram came up from Egypt, he and his wife with him. And for this, the text states, Sarah earned a transcendental life. That life belonged to her. So what does this mean? The first reference is to Eve. She believed that happiness could only be found by experiencing the garden from within, meaning that she was really only concerned with her inner happiness. The snake in the Garden of Eden helps to solidify that conception of happiness for Eve, and through Eve, this seems to affect all of humanity as well. For better or for worse, we are accustomed to focusing on our own happiness. The second example is of Noah, the man who had the chance to start over again, to abandon selfishness and look for a new way of being happy. So what did he do? He got drunk. He forgot who he was, and he was happy. Besides there being a problem with only being able to find happiness with the aids of a substance, Noah's happiness also stems from servicing his own needs. While the entire world was wiped clean, Noah's inherent focus on his own inner happiness was still present. And again, the world was confused about happiness. And then comes Sarah. She came face to face with the possibility of advancing her status dramatically when Pharaoh took her as his own. She was in his territory, under his patronage, and the Pharaoh offered her the opportunity to have her own power in this land. Sarah, however, stood her ground and refused. She remained faithful to Abraham and remained faithful to God. Even though she was in Pharaoh's palace and offered wealth and power and prosperity, she transcended that temptation and ruled over it, and in a sense, ruled over Pharaoh as well. She understood that wealth and power and personal comforts would not lead to her ultimate happiness, but rather Sarah found a much deeper meaning in her life. In Rabbi Lawrence Kirschner and Rabbi Karyolitsky's commentary on the Svat Emet, a mid-19th century rabbi, they share that the Svat Emet expressed that not only were the years of Sarah's life equally good, but that each and every one of them was good. Even though Sarah had many disappointments and struggles, she learned to make each year good in its own way. It was not always circumstance that led to her happiness, but rather a sense of positivity and purpose that allowed her years to be equally good. As such, the Svat Emet teaches that we must live our lives to try to emulate Sarah. And then the world handed us the year of 2020 and said, best of luck with this one. We all go through our bad days and our good days, but in order to make each year a good one, we have to learn to take the bad with the good and learn to persevere through this. In an article published this week on E-Jewish Philanthropy, Dr. Betsy Stone, a retired psychologist who currently teaches as a lecturer at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, offers a few suggestions for enduring the trauma of this challenging year. Dr. Stone writes that cases are rising, the temperature is dropping, and our homes seem to be getting smaller. Our children are always there, and we've become their teachers as well as their parents. Zoom fatigue is real. Racial injustices continue. The election and its wrangling are ongoing. We vacillate between exhaustion and exhaustion. She continues that she has been teaching groups of different teachers and educators, and that she keeps hearing the same thing, that these leaders' responsibilities keep growing, and that they are always expected to be happy, that they never have the time nor the space to recover. Dr. Stone goes on to describe why this is unsustainable and dangerous and, of course, difficult. She concludes her article by stating that there should be no shame in our exhaustion, that we might not be able to accomplish as much in the month 8 of this pandemic as we could have in months 1 or 2 or 3, and that we need to be allowed and allow ourselves to just do a little less, to feel like life is harder, because it is. We need to support each other when we're down and not demand happy faces, we are fatigued. Zoom fatigued, decision fatigued, political fatigued, COVID, racial injustice, loneliness fatigue, family fatigue. So what is Dr. Stone's advice? She writes, give yourself and those around you a break. Take a true Shabbat. Do less and be satisfied with what you can achieve. Say no occasionally. Don't ask so much of yourself or of others. It's okay to be imperfect at this time. It's always been okay to be imperfect. Just be kind to yourself and take a break. We need it and able to move us forward. Even Sarah took a moment to just sit and laugh. Her life was filled with struggles, but perhaps she was able to persevere by the simple act of being kind to herself. To better understand this life and death of Abraham and Sarah, we turn back to the teaching of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Zichrono Livracha. Rabbi Sacks also was seemingly unsatisfied with Rashi's claim that all of Sarah's years were equally as good. And he teaches that equally as confusing as this line is the Torah's description of Abraham's death at the end of the Parsha. Abraham breathed his last and died at a good age, old and satisfied, and he was gathered to his people. However, Abraham had been promised that he would become the father of many nations, that he would inherit a great amount of land. But he did not live to see these promises fulfilled. So how can we imagine that Abraham was satisfied at the end of his life? The answer Rabbi Sacks puts forward for both Sarah and Abraham is that to understand a death, we have to understand the value of life. Friedrich Nietzsche, a 19th century German philosopher, said that he who has a why in life can bear almost any how. It was Sarah and Abraham's sense of destiny and calling that gave their lives purpose and allowed them to survive the difficult times and even the unfulfilled goals at the ends of their lives, because they had the faith that the journey that they had started was not yet over. They died satisfied that they had played an important part and taken the first steps for the future of their family. So as we hold these teachings of Dr. Stone and Rabbi Sacks together, we can ask ourselves, what does happiness look like at this time? Can we still feel a sense of accomplishment, even if we commit to leaving a particular task half finished? And more profoundly, and certainly most importantly, how can we identify our whys in life and help us to figure out those hows? Abraham and Sarah knew that everything that happened to them, even the bad parts of their lives, were part of the journey on which God had sent them. And they had the faith to walk through the valley of the shadow of death, fearing no evil, knowing that God was with them. We'll give Rabbi Sacks the final words. He writes, faith helps us to find the why that allows us to bear our hows. The serenity of Sarah's and Abraham's deaths was an eternal testimony to how they lived. May it be for us as well. Shabbat Shalom.